It was very still all about, and Peter sensed a significance in the silence, and lay very quietly, watching the light in the cabin and the shadowy form of his master. Also, he knew that somewhere in the distance a storm was gathering. The breath of it was in the air, though the sky was clear of cloud overhead, except for the haze of a gray and ghostly mist that lay between them and the yellow stars. Jolly Roger counted the seconds between then and moonrise. It seemed hours before the golden rim of it rose in the east. Shadows grew swiftly after that. Grotesque things took shape. The rock caps of the ridge began to light up like timid signal fires. Black spruce and balsam and cedar glistened as if bathed in enamel. And the moon came on, and mellow floods of light played in the valleys and plains, and danced over the forest tops, and in voiceless and soundless miracle called upon all living things to look upon the glory of God. In his soul Jolly Roger McKay felt the urge and the call of that voiceless master power, and through his lips came an unconscious whisper of prayer, of gratitude. And he watched the light in Jed Hawkins' cabin, and strained his ears to hear a sound of footsteps coming through the moonlight. But there was no change. The light did not move. A door did not open or close. There was no sound, except the growing whisper of the wind, the call of a night bird, and the howl of the old gray wolf that always cried out to the moon from the tangled depths of Indian Tom's swamp. A thrill of nervousness swept through Jolly Roger. He waited half an hour, 3/4, an hour after the moon had risen. And Nada did not come. The nervousness grew in him, and he moved out into the moon-glow, and slowly and watchfully followed the edge of the rock shadows until he came to the fringe of cedars and spruce behind the cabin. Peter, careful not to snap a twig under his paws, followed closely. They came to the cabin, and there, very distinctly, Jolly Roger McKay heard the low moaning of a voice. He edged his way to the window and looked in. Crouched beside a chair in the middle of the floor was Jed Hawkins' woman. She was moaning, and her thin body was rocking back and forth, and with her hands clasped at her bony breast, she was staring at the open door. With a shock, Jolly Roger saw that except for the strangely crying old woman, the cabin was empty. Sudden fear chilled his blood, a fear that scarcely took form before he was at the door and in the cabin. The woman's eyes were red and wild as she stared at him, and she stopped her moaning and her hands unclasped. Jolly Roger went nearer and bent over her and shivered at the half-mad terror he saw in her face. "Where is Nada?" he demanded. "Tell me, where is she?" "Gone, gone, gone," crooned the woman, clutching her hands at her breast again. "Jed has taken her. Taken her to Mooney's shack, over near the railroad. Oh, my God! I tried to keep her, but I couldn't. He dragged her away. And tonight he's selling her to Mooney. The devil, the black brute, the tie cutter!" She choked and began rocking herself back and forth, and the moaning came again from her thin lips. Fiercely McKay gripped her by the shoulder. "Mooney's shack? Where?" he cried. "Quick! Tell me!" "1,000! 1,000! He's given $1,000 to git her in the shack, alone!" she cried in a dull, sing-song voice. "The road out there leads straight to it, near the railroad. 1 mile, 2 miles. I tried to keep him from doing it, but I couldn't. I couldn't." Jolly Roger heard no more. He was out of the door and running across the open with Peter racing close behind him. They struck the road, and Jolly Roger swung into it and continued to run until the breath was out of his lungs. And all that time the things Nada had told him about Jed Hawkins and the tie cutter were rushing madly through his brain. An hour or two ago, when the words had come from her lips in the jackpine thicket, he had believed that Nada was frightened, that a distorted fear possessed her, that such a thing as she had half confessed to him was too monstrous to happen. And now he cried out aloud, a groaning, terrible cry, as he went on. Hawkins and Nada had reached Mooney's shack long before this, a shack buried deep in the wilderness, a shack from which no cries could be heard. Peter, trotting behind, whined at what he heard in Jolly Roger McKay's panting voice. And the moon shone on them as they staggered and ran, and here and there dark clouds were racing past the face of it, and the slumberous whisper of storm grew nearer in the air. And then came the time when one of the dark clouds rode under the moon, and the two ran on in darkness. The cloud passed, and the moon flooded the road again with light, and suddenly Jolly Roger stopped in his tracks, and his heart almost broke in the strain of that moment. Ahead of them, staggering toward them, sobbing as she came, was Nada. Jolly Roger's blazing eyes saw everything in that vivid light of the moon. Her hair was tangled and twisted about her shoulders and over her breast. One arm was bare where the sleeve had been torn away, and her girlish breast gleamed white where her waist had been stripped half from her body. And then she saw Jolly Roger in the trail, with wide-open, reaching arms, and with a cry such as Peter had never heard come from her lips before, she ran into them, and held up her face to him in the yellow moonlight. In her eyes, great, tearless, burning pools, he saw the tragedy, and yet it was only that, and not horror, nor despair, not the other thing. His arms closed crushingly about her. Her slim body seemed to become a part of him. Her hot lips reached up and clung to his. And then, "Did he get you to Mooney's shack?" He felt her body stiffen against him. "No," she panted. "I fought every inch. He dragged me, and hit me, and tore my clothes, but I fought. And up there, in the trail, he turned his back for a moment when he thought I was done, and I hit him with a club. And he's there now, on his back." She did not finish. Jolly Roger thrust her out from him, arm's length. A cloud under the moon hid his face, but his voice was low and terrible. "Nada, go to the Missioner's as fast as you can," he said, fighting to speak coolly. "Take Peter and go. You will make it before the storm breaks. I am going back to have a few words with Jed Hawkins, alone. Then I will join you, and the Missioner will marry us." The cloud was gone, and he saw joy and radiance in her face. Fear had disappeared. Her eyes were luminous with the golden glow of the night. Her red lips were parted, entreating him with the lure of their purity and love, and for a moment he held her close in his arms again, kissing her as he might have kissed an angel, while her little hand stroked his face, and she laughed softly and strangely in her happiness, the wonder of a woman's soul rising swiftly out of the sweetness of her girlhood. And then Jolly Roger set her firmly in the direction she was to go. "Hurry, little girl," he said. "Hurry, before the storm breaks." She went, calling Peter softly, and Jolly Roger strode down the trail, not once looking back, and bent only upon the vengeance he would this night wreak upon the two lowest brutes in creation. Never before had he felt the desire to kill. But he felt that desire now. Before the night was much older he would do unto Hawkins and Mooney as Hawkins had done unto Peter. He would leave them alive, but broken and crippled and forever punished. And then he stumbled over something in another darkening of the moon. He stopped, and the light came again, and he looked down into the upturned face of Jed Hawkins. It was a distorted and twisted face, and its one eye was closed. The body did not move. And close to the head was the club which Nada had used. Jolly Roger laughed grimly.